Okay, we are live once more. Me, Bernard Marr, and Bruno Aziza from Google. How are you, Bruno?
I am doing great. Good morning, everyone. I'm calling in from California, so it is morning for me, and you can hear my dog already getting upset because we're redoing our bathrooms, and I have people working right outside this door, and so
Excellent.
um,
Yeah,
you're getting a preview of my life.
yeah, exactly. That's the beauty of working from home, isn't it? I was
Absolutely.
I was doing I had a fascinating conversation this week with Chris Hadfield, who is like a legendary astronaut, and he had his dog there as well, which was and it was barking in the background. But it was such a privilege to speak to him, and anyone who wants to rewatch this can do so on my YouTube channel. And we were talking about how to whether space is the next frontier for agriculture and biology. And he is such a cool guy. He basically went, I think he's been on 3 missions. He's flown the space shuttle. He was the commander of the International Space Station, and you might remember him. He played David Bowie's song Space Oddity. He was the first person to record a music video in space.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's pretty unique. And I know there's a lot of people talking about making movies in space as well. So
yeah,
this is starting to become a key topic here.
yeah, and he had we had such cool conversations, and he was talking about um they're basically running 200 experiments all the time on a spaceship. And I was asking him about 3D printing, because in the space station they can't take all the tools with them, so they have a 3D printer there. So if they need any new tools or replacement part, they can simply print it. And he was talking about the fact that they can now print human tissue. And apparently, if you wanted to print a human liver, for example, as a replacement part for a human, this is really difficult to do this on our planet because of gravity, because it just squashes all of the stuff together. And in space, where you have no gravity, you can actually 3D print human tissue much better, which I just found super fascinating.
Wow, that's kind of interesting slash a little bit scary as well.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about something that might be a little bit more real, which is this idea of talk about transformation, digital transformation. I watched your video of the 9 companies that have succeeded with digital transformation,
Mm.
many of which I've worked with. Yeah, I think you named Starbucks in there and L'Oreal and Walmart and so forth. So I'm just curious a little bit about what drove you to record that video, and then hopefully for the audience here as they start commenting what geography they're in, maybe we can talk about a few of them.
Yes, so basically, I get this question asked pretty much at every conference I speak at, and every training session I give, and at every executive seminar. They always say, "Okay, can you give me some examples of companies that do digital transformation well?" So I thought I just put together my favorite examples. And so Starbucks for me has been fantastic because they've really weathered the pandemic extremely well. They've had a lot of the infrastructure in place already in terms of cloud and a really powerful app, but they've really leveraged this and leveraged data, and this has enabled them to transform really successfully. In terms of, again, some incumbent organizations, I love L'Oreal as an example. They've done so many cool things that really help them transform digitally. So one of the things they've done is that they created an innovation center in Silicon Valley to make sure that they are among the right culture and among the talent there. And then what they've also done is they've ensured that this doesn't become completely detached. So there's a nice hub and spoke model where people get um, seconded in and out of those to make sure they bring some of this back into the organization. And they're doing so many cool things that they're now again, we're talking about the metaverse. They now have an app that allows you to, almost like a Snapchat filter, to put makeup on and try different shades of coloring for your hair. And a really cool example is that they have now created a robot that you put into the store that will personalize makeup for you. So you scan your skin and you can then completely personalize it. And this machine basically manufactures the product as you wait, which is pretty cool. So again, completely disrupting the traditional supply chain of cosmetics.
Yeah,
Um,
I work quite a bit with L'Oreal. If Antoine's listening to us here, as someone I've had the opportunity and his team to work with, because lots and lots of data. I think 20 terabyte of data coming across 8,000 data sets that, he kind of took us through how they got organized. And what's interesting in that industry is that it's not just a change in the relationship with the customer, but it's also right relationship online versus in the store, but it's also changing how you can deliver an experience. I think the application they have is Motiface, or it's a name like that, that enables you to really kind of experience what the makeup is going to look like and so forth, and even suggest, based on your profile, maybe makeup you wouldn't have not considered. So you can see here we're witnessing not just the first phase of digital transformation, which was about going from a very physical, go to the store, talk to someone to sell to you, and then try to customize on the fly, to a completely online experience, which now is augmented because now I have a lot more information about similar visitors to your site, similar previous customers, and you can really make the experience a lot better than it ever was. And so I think when we talk about digital transformations, there really should be multi phases, right? You see organizations that were completely physical that now are figuring out, well, you can pay with your phone, and now I think where I live, I don't think I've gone to a restaurant or a physical location now where I've had to pull out my credit card to pay with my phone everywhere, because
mm,
touchless has become the standard. To then organizations that are way past that, where now, of course, they manage their inventory, they manage their customer experiences now to the next level, where they can make the experience better in a way that it just couldn't have not been possible in the physical world at all. And so we've learned a lot, I think, through this transition, and you can see kind of how different organizations are equipped, and some of them that are still struggling. I was talking to retailers. This is from my personal example, where they were supposed to deliver something and they didn't know where that good was. And that is a contrast from a company like an Uber, which knows by the second, by the minute, where the driver is.
mm.
Some retailers are still having to figure out, okay, where are my goods? Because I didn't know how to deliver, and I didn't know how to inform in real time where my inventory was moving. And so digital transformation takes many flavors.
Absolutely. No, 100%. And I was just looking through my list of other companies that I wrote about in that article or in that video. And Nike for me is another really good example. They have really embraced technology. That they've always done this and they embrace innovation. But what I really love is how they are now using data really at the center of everything they do. So one thing they decided to do is to move more to a direct to consumer model. Instead of having thousands of retailers selling their trainers, they said actually we can build a much better, closer customer relationship. And then they also again used apps like a Nike Plus running app that gives them data back and enables them to communicate. And they have this really cool app that allows you to scan your foot, because when you order trainers or sneakers or any apparel, the challenge is that every trainer is cut slightly differently, and some of them fit really well and some of them don't. So this is why when you buy shoes, you're much more inclined to go into a shop and try them on. And for online retail, this is a real challenge. So they developed this app that allows you to scan your foot, and then it will measure your exact dimensions and then recommend shoes that will actually fit your shape of foot, which I think is super cool. And then one of my favorite examples is that they're again taking the metaverse very seriously now, and they're realizing actually instead of selling only real world sneakers and trainers, in the future we will dress our avatars with Nike trainers. So they bought a company called Artifact Studios, which has been very successful at creating digital only shoes and things. And I see this from my own perspective, the amount of pocket money my kids spend on skins for Fortnite and other games. That is a huge market, and companies like Burberry, for example, another company I mentioned, that have really embraced this, and they're now making sure that they're selling their goods and have a brand presence in the metaverse.
Now, we talk about these organizations. I see some of the comments here asking us to talk about real estate. I think we'll get there when we touch the metaverse. I want to touch on a few things though. Retailers, which I think you're absolutely right, and when you're manufacturing goods and you're distributing, I mean, we certainly see. I think in your video you talked about Walmart as an organization that's managing their supply chain and built the largest. I think you said the largest private data cloud. um, we also see, companies actually that you didn't name. Carrefour is a French retailer that's built, I think, Europe's largest data lake. It's been able to not just change the way it has a compelling customer experience, but also now use data to provide a better experience to their partners. I think Carrefour is the most visited website in France. It's 15 million
Is it
uh,
really?
visitors. They have 80 million people, households, I think, that buy from Carrefour every year. And so they have a lot of data and a lot of knowledge that they, of course, use for their own stores and what they're selling. But they're also now partnering the rest of the community to make a better experience, even though you might not be buying directly from Carrefour. So there's definitely a lot going on the retail space, and I'm sure other industries creating compelling experiences. The question I have for you, as you're thinking about all these companies, we're talking about the results here, but how'd they get there? What's unique about these organizations that you think they're able to get there? Is it a new leader? Is it a disruptive or disrupted industry? What are you seeing as you're talking to all these organizations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was at an AWS board level roundtable yesterday, and we talked about exactly that. So we had people from different organizations, and the question was, how do we actually create this sustainable um, digital transformation to some extent? And some of the things that I was saying is that it's really important to have leaders with the right digital IQ. And I think it's really important to understand that digital data, blockchain, metaverse, all these things, Web3, that they are so fundamentally transforming organizations that it's really important that everyone on the board has a grasp of it. They don't need to be tech experts, but they need to have an understanding of what is happening and how some of these technologies can drive strategy. Sometimes what I'm seeing is that organizations still look at strategy the wrong way around, where they traditionally feel we define our strategy and then we use technology to help us implement this. What I'm increasingly seeing is that some of these technologies are actually transforming our strategy and driving new strategies. If you think about the metaverse, for example, where Nike now needs to re-envisage what products they're selling and thinking about digital only products, something that 20 years ago they would have thought you were crazy if they said you will at some point sell digital trainers. And um, so for me, that is a really fundamental starting point. Another really important component of this is when I refer to L'Oreal's innovation hub, is I see this with other companies like Anheuser-Busch Busch in InBev. They created this innovation hub again in Silicon Valley called the Beer Garage, where they brought people from their own organization into Silicon Valley to make sure they bring some of this knowledge and have a finger on the pulse, and and again, bringing this back into the organization is really important. And for me, another really important part of all of this is what I call hand holding, that organizations actually give their employees the support to continuously learn, and the support of, so for example, Shell is a company that I've done lots of work with, and they realize, okay, we need people that, if you look at the data space, for example, one of my big bugbears is that organizations create a nice little data warehouse, then they put a nice analytics tool on top of it, and then they go and say, voila, now everyone has self-service BI, go away and answer all your questions. And surprise, surprise, this doesn't happen. And so what Shell did in this space is say, okay, we need to do some hand holding. We need to create a new job role of a data translator, for example, someone that sits between the business function and the analytics function, that works. So, and they have them for each of the key departments, and they help to bridge those gaps and help people in the business to understand what data there is and how they can use it. And they help the business analyst translate some of their findings into business friendly content. um, and then they partnered with the Udemy, for example, and created a customized course or a number of courses for Shell employees that anyone can take who wants to take them, where they look at some of the key technologies and trying to upskill their employees, and again improve the digital IQ of their employees. And for me, they're all really important components: having the right leadership, having the right link into innovation areas and new knowledge, and making sure you do the hand holding and the support. And I guess the most important component of all of this is then organizational culture, that
Yeah.
you create the culture of innovation where people are empowered to do their own thing, where people are not afraid to make mistakes. All of this is part of this new world that, and I guess one of the biggest barriers is if organizations basically try to protect the status quo, where people are too busy to do what they've always done. And for me, one of the key words here is actually you need leaders and people that have humility, that actually are humble, and they realize the world is changing so fast, customers are changing all the time, I don't have all the answers, but as long as I acknowledge this and bring people in with the right skills to help me, that's a good starting point.
So there's a lot to impact in what you just said here. At least what I'm learning from the examples you're sharing here is there are three ways to digitally transform your company. There is the lift and shift way of saying, we have a business that runs this way and we want it to run in a digital way, and essentially a lift the existing processes and put them in a digital environment and then hope that gets you a lift. And there is the second way where you're now maybe changing your processes in a way that creates a compelling customer experience and really forces you to rethink maybe some of the older processes and maybe retire some and optimize, I would say. And then the third one, which I think is where you're going, is this idea of reinventing yourself. Is maybe you do need to have new roles, maybe you do need to invent new processes, and maybe some of the technology that is now available to you is actually giving you new insights. It's creating new processes that you could have never been able to imagine in phase one of your digital transformation. So I actually don't know if there's research on this in the market, but I could see an article in your future talking about the three ways of digitalizing and what it means to be in this third category, which to me is where reinvention and innovation occurs, because now you're freed of most of the limitations you might have had in the first one. And certainly when you're just taking what you had in the old world and just making it available online, you're still constrained with limitations of the past. And so I want to go on to one more example I watched in your video. You can tell I really liked it. Is the example of Disney, because again, it's a customer I've not particularly worked with, but I thought the use case was interesting where they have now this bracelet that acts as a check-in device, but also provides um, information to Disney, I think, in real time so they can optimize your experience while you're in the park. Tell us more about what's happening there, what's unique there, and maybe what you learned from the use case and the customer in particular.
Yeah, so Disney called this the Magic Band. So, and this is basically a little IoT enabled wristband that you get when you go to any of the Disney parks, and they function as your room keys as well. So if you're staying in a Disney hotel, you can open your door with it, and you can pay with them. So they function as a digital wallet, or as an you can link it to your credit card. And and what was interesting is that this gave Disney for the first time a 360-degree view of their customers. So they knew not only when people arrive and when they go, but where you've been, how long you've queued for certain rides, where you went for lunch, when you went to bed even, and so on. And this then, and they've always done this very effectively, they then use all of this data to not only decide where to put ice cream sellers at a certain time of the day, but also to make the user experience better, to then say, um, okay, you're now queuing at this ride, go to the other one. There's currently no queue. We know from our data that the queue on this ride will go down after 3, so come back afterwards. And 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 this for me is a really fascinating way of using data, and creating data that simply didn't exist before. um, what we're now seeing is that a lot of this data is now being replaced by app-based data. So I had a customer here in the UK that was a holiday park operator, and they again wanted to collect better data, but they didn't have the budget that Disney has to create a completely new device and collect data. And they simply created an app. And because we have all of this data, we have all the sensors in our phones already, it will then give them automatically all of this data. And increasingly they will, I guess, shift from the Magic Band to an app that you now use to navigate your Disney experience when you go there.
Yeah, and I think there's of course considerations for privacy you have to think about a lot
Mhm.
here. Of course, I'm not sure that I want to give Disney access to my phone location and all of that. But the use case itself, particularly with the band, I think they sell the band as well. So I think as a user, it is a dedicated use case for the band that you choose to buy as a customer of Disney. Um, I find it interesting because it bridges the two worlds, the very physical world and the very digital world of saying, just like you said, really focused on my experience. It is 2:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I know that this next ride typically is not used by a lot of people. Let me create a better experience for you to route you there. I think that's really super interesting, and I can't wait to see other use cases like that that are going back to the physical world even better. This
Mm.
past month, I had my first partner meeting in person, where I had a dinner with the good folks or Didaiku, and I hadn't been in a meeting like that for months, right? With people that hadn't met before and so forth. And so the experience was definitely different in checking into the restaurant, validating vaccination and so forth. And then yesterday, I did my first in-person EBC, which again, way streamlined because a lot of uh, processes have been implemented to make sure that vaccination is checked. Your slides are already ready to go by the time you get to the room. The only thing that you touch is the clicker. Is really quite unique on, making my life in a way a lot easier than it might have been before we had all these issues. And so I think some companies are learning a lot how to turn this difficulty into something that's ultimately is going to make us better for today and certainly more prepared for the future if we run into similar issues like that.
Yeah, I love this. I was mentioning the dinner I went to yesterday, and that was a proper hybrid event. So in the past, I've attended these and they were virtual only, but this one I had a choice. I could either go to a five-star hotel in London and be cooked for by a two-star Michelin chef and sit with people in the same room, or I could stay at home. And I decided to stay at home. So they sent me a, a box of sample wines and a food hamper. And then when they served dinner in London, we had a little wine tasting. So a sommelier came up, a wine master, and explained the different wines. And then we had discussions, and they had the discussions in London, and we had them here. And then they brought them together really well. And I thought that was the first time where I've experienced a really successful virtual event, or a hybrid event, where it felt like we were almost there in the room with people, and then we could meet and discuss really effectively in the virtual room, but then we were feeding this back into the main room and we could see everyone else there. And for me, that has to be the future, because I don't want to always go into London. I have kids that I need to drive around to clubs and stuff, and actually my work-life balance is better than ever, and I don't want to spend the whole evening on trains and being away from home. So this works perfectly well for me.
Oh, you and I have been on trips before, I'm sure, where we travel for 15 hours for a 1 hour meeting, right? So highly
Absolutely.
inefficient use of our time, uh, wasteful as well in terms of resourcing, flying and creating all that congestion is not great for the planet either. Tell me
No.
more about this event. So were you on the Zoom? How did you, because one of the things I think that's hard for people going back to work is what was useful about all of us being online, it was a great equalizer. So there's nobody in the room and there was nobody online. We're all online, so we all have the same size. We all have
Mm,
the same conditions, and we can all take turns by raising our hands and so forth. I think one of the issues for companies now going back to work is people that choose to be offline and people that choose to be online. Well, there's going to be interruption in the room that you're not going to be able to. So how did that all work in this in this event?
yeah, so it for me it worked really well. So they had a speaker in, and so in the beginning was just we met virtually, had a little introduction virtually, and then we joined the room in London on a live stream. And we used Zoom for that, and then we listened to the main speaker, and then we broke up. So the people in London had their starter served. We had our first wine, and then we went into a discussion group to answer a specific question. And then basically, like you would, every table then feeds it back, and they had, I think, four tables in, or three or four tables in London, and then us virtually. And then we joined the Zoom again, and they had really good camera movement there as well. So you had someone that would then go to the table. They had a roving mic, and then we could see what the people in London would feed back, and we had it felt like a proper conversation. So for me, it worked really well going in and out of these digital and real world events.
I wonder, we talked about creating new roles as people digitalize. I wonder if there's going to be a new role created to run these parties where half of it is in person, half of it is online, to make sure that there is engagement and so on. Certainly, when you can move from one virtual room to the next, that creates a lot of opportunities to meet a lot more people. Because
Hmm.
in the past, if you go to a restaurant and you're in person and you sit next to someone, well, socially, it's difficult to start moving around and then going to a different conversation. Whereas here, you could probably have someone be a professional at running events like that and make it a much better experience for everyone.
Hmm.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, and at some point we then have another dimension where we have our 3D avatars joining as well. I'm actually
Yeah,
just
so and you didn't use 3D glasses for this, right? This was
no.
purely Zoom and so forth. So tell me more about your avatar. So I know you've been working on that.
Yes, so this is super cool. Again, if anyone wants to see this, they can see it on my YouTube channel or on my TikTok channel, which is brand new. And I'd also did a really good. I had a conversation with the CEO of Synthesia, the company that helped me to develop my digital avatar. So they are an AI company, and what they've done is they developed this online platform where you can basically choose an avatar, and they have lots of them. So, for example, if you wanted to do um, online training, yeah, and what you do is you simply type your text into a Word document, press generate, and it will then generate a video of this avatar that you've chosen, which looks super real. And then you can choose their voice, even their language. If you want this to be in German, in Chinese, and English, you do whatever you choose, and then it will create the video of it. And then you have editing capabilities, so you can edit the video, include slides and backgrounds and everything else. And if you think about this, this makes so much sense, because for training videos, if you have to change a little bit, there's a new a guideline coming out in your company, you then have to book a studio. You need to find someone that can do the presentations. You need the lighting guy, the sound guy, the video guy. Then you need post production. Now you can do this all. You can simply go into the document, change it, add something, press a button, and it will regenerate it. So what I did, I've basically have worked with them to create my custom avatar. So I spent some time in a studio recording myself, and this avatar now looks like me. And then I worked with another company called Descript, who created a synthetic voice. So again, I spent some time recording myself, reading a specific script, and those two companies now work together. So when when I type some text into this platform and say generate, it then generates a video of me that speaks and looks like me, and this is pretty cool stuff. So all my content now that I produce on TikTok is my avatar. And actually my latest video is my avatar talking to another avatar on the web. There's a really cool customer service avatar called Sophie, and it's just mind blowing, all of this.
You'll have to send me that because I mean, I was gonna say when you told me about the second avatar that you figured out a way to clone yourself, but really, you have figured out a way to clone yourself,
Absolutely.
and you're doing it in multiple languages as well, right? So we get to hear you in English, Spanish, and all types of languages, right?
Yes, I it's interesting. I did a on my YouTube channel. I now have a video that explains or gives examples of NFTs, and this is completely AI generated. And I've got one in English and another one in Spanish. So
That's pretty
it's
cool.
it is pretty cool stuff.
Now, before we transition, I want to talk to you about the data mesh, which is a topic I know lots of people are interested in
Yes.
talking about. Mike, nice to see you again. Mike here is suggesting, have an idea. You need wine samples to share with you on your live stream. That might work for Bernard, Mike, but for me, it's 9:30 a.m., 9:35 a.m. So that would be really hard for me to make that happen. But I will point you to an app that I actually discovered through Bernard. I don't know if you remember this, we were having dinner, this is years ago in London, and you told me about this app, Vivino, which uses artificial intelligence to determine wines that I will like. And I've been using it now for a few years. And it's really, really good. It's really, really accurate. And so, definitely, Mike, send us the names, but we definitely will not be drinking, I think, while we're doing this. We can't
It's
do.
it's interesting. I actually on my YouTube channel you can see a video interview with the Vivino founder and CEO Heini, and he um after that conversation, I was so blown away by all of this. I now use this app all the time, and um, it is fascinating. And there are a number of different companies that now use or are exploring wine and AI. So there's another company, I forgot the name, but I interviewed their founder and CEO, and she is fascinating. And what they're doing is they're basically creating a taste profile for every wine. So in Vivino at the moment, you're saying, I like this wine, I don't like this wine, and then they have to somehow figure out why you didn't like it or why you liked it. So they will propose similar wines to you, and then give you a percentage of how likely you are that you might like a certain wine that you scan. With this other company is that they are looking at the taste profile. So you fill out a survey saying these are the tastes I really like and these are tastes I don't like. And then they will have taste profiles of all the wines, and then they can match it, which I think is even a cooler example.
Yeah, this is a great example of, recommendation at work. The thing that I like about Vivino is that you just have to take a photo of the wine and then the application does the rest for you. But I was
Exactly.
talking recently with someone at dinner, actually, at this partner dinner I was telling you about this idea of recommendation. The idea that you have a limited view of the world yourself, but you also have a limited view of your possibilities. And so using recommendation and data across a wider sample allows you to discover things about yourself you didn't know about yourself. And so that's why I think these applications are really interesting. You know that the unexpected app that is using this is an application called Libby. I don't know if it's available everywhere in the world, but um, it's my public library application, and basically it's probably one of the best consumer applications I've seen, and it's free. And it's, I read a lot, so it's figured out my reading tastes, and it's uh giving me, here's the next book that you should read, and here's why, and here are collections you should consider, here are magazines that you should consider. And so I think the world is going to be a lot more like this, where you're going to be able to open your phone and then have, some recommendation engine tell you, hey, have you thought about doing those things? Now, of course, you could choose to do them or not. The recommendation engine is not 100% right all the time, but I think it's an interesting world in helping you discover things that you would have never in a million years been able to discover by yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like this idea of combining. Wine is definitely one of my passions. So combining this, so I was thinking about my what we're doing here, those conversations, and my videos and my podcasts, because there are some really nice ones that say AI and wine or AI and coffee, and but as you've highlighted, the challenge is for me. It's now Friday afternoon here in London, and it feels like I should be having a glass of wine soon, whereas lots of my lots of the people I speak to are somewhere in California and on the West Coast, and that makes it a bit more tricky when it's you don't quite are ready for a glass of wine in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be really challenging for me
Yeah.
to join you in that. But let's talk about the data mesh, because I know this is a topic that lots of people, and here I'm looking at some of the comments here. Lots of people are interested in hearing about. I had the opportunity this past month to keynote the Data Mesh Summit. Zamak is the author of the Data Mesh paper, and she brought me in to talk about how to make the data mesh real. Is this a concept that you hear a lot on your end, or what are some of the top questions that you get when
No, it's definitely a topic that is increasingly coming up, and I think what uh, for a start, people say, I've heard about this data mesh. What is it? So maybe you can start with answering that question first.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a paper that was published a few years ago that was really trying to handle this issue of distributed innovation and distributed data, right? So the world that we've been in the data AI and analytics world has been really about, what should I do? Should I centralize all my teams and all my data and then serve my business with ready to go insights? Or should I distribute? And the pendulum's kind of swung multiples. When I started my career, it was all about centralization, because centralization was the way to get economies of scale. It was the way to understand how much data needed to be stored. At the time, storing data was very expensive. And so it was scary to enable the business. And then gradually we moved to a model where now you enable everyone because it's more affordable, and there's more skill sets in the business units to work with technology and intelligence and analytics software. And the issue that that was created by this model, particularly pre-cloud, was that now a lot of data moved around. And so now you ran into issues around not just skill sets, but also governance, and issues where definitions are so malleable across these business units, it's really hard to get everybody on the same page. So you got technology advantage, you get agility, but maybe you're getting agility on data that's not governed and data that is not agreed upon. And so that's been really kind of an issue in the industry. So the data mesh paper is about that. Is about how do we move to a world that takes advantage to cloud infrastructure, takes advantage to technology like data fabric that allows you to govern data, even though it might not be centrally stored and create these pockets, if you will, of innovation. So your people can react to local conditions, apply their local knowledge, and then contribute to the rest of the organization. We had the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations that have succeeded with the data mesh, like Delivery Hero, and we talked about Carrefour earlier, but there's many, many examples of that. And so Zamak asked me to kind of talk about, what do you need in order to make the data mesh real? And so I quoted a few resources here that I'll share with you on, when do you know that you're ready for the data mesh, the 10 reasons for why you shouldn't try the data mesh, and so forth. And so I'm happy to talk about each of those things if you want. I know Mike here is sharing with us a few comments. And so if people want to ask any questions on that, I'm happy, of course, to talk about why you should not consider the data mesh as a start. You want me to do that?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, and I'll point people to the blog. This is actually not something I wrote, but this is a resource that I thought was very helpful. It's written by Thin Ha. He's a customer engineer, works with a lot of organizations to make these concepts become real, and he came out with this blog. It's a Medium blog that is called "The 10 Reasons Why You Are Not Ready to Adopt the Data Mesh." Now, I'm not going to be able to go over all 10, but there's a few that I think are interesting. The first one is this idea around decentralization. His rule is if you're not operating at a scale where decentralization makes sense. And so here, the term scale is something that I think is a big keyword because organizations typically they think, oh, it's really about the number of employees. And I think what we've discovered in this fast moving world of the data space, if you will, is that it's not really about how many employees you have, it's about how many interactions you have with customers, how distributed your organization is, how much data you're dealing with, and how much real time reaction is needed to be embedded into your decision making. And so I think when he refers to this is if you have an organization of one person and you're, or maybe a few, and you're really hyper localized and you are not needing to distribute insights across multiple functions and multiple regions, then you might not need this concept of the data mesh. But I think the reality is that today there are very few organizations that are in this case. So I think his rule of why you're not ready for the data mesh actually made me think that well, this concept is applicable to a lot of organizations. And so of course, you have to ask yourself if the what they say the juice is worth the squeeze. But in general, if you're working in the digital world with customers online, you're going to be by nature distributed. Certainly, in the case of Delivery Hero, what we saw is that they grew by acquiring companies that were hyper local. Delivery Hero is a network for delivering food, and so they've done a lot of great innovative work. And I'm happy to put. I did an interview of their technical leader a few weeks ago, so I'm happy to put the link to that to share the best practice. The other one I think you'll like is if you treat the data mesh as a technical solution versus an operating model that continuously evolves over time. And I think that touches on what you talked about, this idea of, most of the stuff that's really hard is actually not the hard stuff. What I mean by that is it's the soft stuff. It's the culture aspect. It's how you organize yourself. It's who you hire and who you decide to put in charge of these initiatives that really gets in the way of building an effective data mesh. And I know you wrote a lot about data culture. So maybe tell us a little about how to build a culture that accepts these types of changes and these types of new concepts.
Yeah, so for me, it goes back to some of the examples I talked about earlier in Shell, for example, where they are trying to make the entire company more data driven. So for me, the same principles really apply, that you make sure that everyone understands the importance of data, and that data is now probably the most important business asset that any business can have, and they need to protect it and make sure that it's of the right quality, and that is secure, and protects people's privacy and all those important things that come with it.
Yeah.
And then I think is helping people to find the right use cases for the data. So a bit like the having a data translator in the organization to have those conversations with. The other thing that Shell is doing on a regular basis is to have hackathons where they basically say, we bring a group of developers and data scientists into a room, and then business unit users come along who then can bring any problems and say, this is a real challenge for me. Can I use data and AI and analytics to help me solve this problem? And this is really powerful. And creating communities around data. So there, in addition to making sure people get the training, they also actively work on creating networks and bringing people together and bringing speakers in, and creating this internal awareness of the importance of data. I think they're all really important parts of creating a data culture.
Yeah, and there is in this blog I'm referring to, there's a lot around organizations that will struggle with the data mesh, organizations that have no critical mass of data talent, that have low engineering maturity data teams, and have no cultural support for bottom up decision making, right? Because the idea here is it's not a top down system you're building a distributed model where the distributed innovation centers are contributing to the central entity, if you will. And so it will require a cultural shift, and certainly practices like what you're talking about, hackathon and soft skill development is really important. There's a customer I was working with, Di Mays, who's the chief data officer at the WPP. She's actually based in the UK, who signed up to train thousands of our employees who are not reporting into the data organization today, but that she has identified and her team have identified the need to develop this data talent. And so a lot of opportunities for enablement and education. The one thing that I don't think we have kind of figured out with the data mesh yet is the issues around financial operation. This is a theme that is coming up left and right, because with the cloud, you have now this amazing capacity that's available to you. You can process limitless amounts of data, but organizations are a little afraid of, like, well, how much are going to cost me? And so the first thing, of course, is that if people are processing this much data and they're querying it and building applications, it's got to be a ratio of consumption to value creation. And so you hope that your employees are educated enough that they will drive innovation, and by default, you spending more money on this platform means you getting more usage out of it and you getting more value for your business. But there's also a whole domain called financial ops, which is around how do you allocate effectively the budget for the usage. And so that is something that I think is probably a follow-on paper that needs to be written about the data mesh, because you think about it as a technical concept, you think about it as an organizational concept. Now you got to think about it as a funding concept. How do I make sure that I can grow this and support it, not just with my people and my technology, but also with my budget? And so if people are interested or have ideas around that, I'd love to hear them, because I think that is something that is missing today, is how do you manage budget in a distributed world like that, where innovation now is really going to be empowered.
Hmm.
And well, with that comes a big responsibility, both on the data governance and the data cost.
Yeah, and I think the other point is that it's really important to have open conversations with people, because when it comes to data and AI and other new technologies, there's a lot of fear as well. People are fearful about how their jobs might change, whether they might be automated way to some extent, and the key is that I think the more we embrace it and the more we have open conversations, the more we can actually use this technology to succeed, rather than try to keep it away because we are scared that it might change too many things. I had a really fascinating conversation this month with Ravi Kumar, who is the president of Infosys. So Infosys is one of India's most successful companies. I believe they employ over 120,000 people worldwide. And and anyone who wants to see this conversation can see this on my YouTube channel. And what we talked about is why it is now time for some jobs to be automated, basically using things like AI, and that is actually our imperative to do this. And by doing this, we will make our world a more human place where we can actually give humans the jobs that humans do best, and we give those jobs to the machines that humans, if we're really honest with ourselves, shouldn't really be doing. And one super interesting conversation we had was about how they are now changing their recruitment. I have actually had a follow-up conversation with one of the executive vice presidents and a CEO of an AI recruitment company, to talk about this in a bit more detail, which hopefully will come out in the next week or two. But what we talked about was how they're now shifting from a CV based recruitment to a skills based recruitment. So they use tools. Basically, what they're saying is that your past degrees and your what is on your CV or your resume will become much less important. And if you are a taxi driver that has the right skills, you have a real opportunity to be recruited by them. So it is all about having potential and having the right skill sets and the right attitude. And they're now using the basically you submit your CV, and I was saying, what's why do you still need a CV? And he basically said this is basically just your business card that gives us your address and your name. Everything else is now handled via this AI that assesses different skill sets that they might be looking for. And if you show that you have those skill sets, you are very likely to get a job, which
Yeah.
I love.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I'd love to see how that works in the aggregate because, I'd say as a leader, hiring is probably the most important job an CEO has, and so it's difficult to imagine that being completely automated. But I could see doing this at scale and at least having some data what works and what doesn't. It's so hard to establish what makes an employee successful because so much is not about them. A lot is about the company, the business they're in, and the folks that they're paired with, and all of that. So I'm sure this is a field that we're going to see a lot of innovation into. In fact, speaking about hiring platforms, I have to say, and I'm sure you've hit this limitation a long time ago. I just this past week hit the 30,000 first connection limit on LinkedIn. And I had to send an email to the CEO of LinkedIn saying, I don't understand this limitation because now I have hundreds of people who want to connect with me and they can't. And so how do you work with that? I mean, do you have people follow you, or how do you deal with this? Or did you switch to different networks so you can build more compelling relationships with people, or how do you
It,
deal with that?
it is hard. I think their rationale is that people you connect with are the ones you actually know. And if you so and anyone else can follow you. So followings, you can have an unlimited number of followers, but they are basically saying it's unrealistic that people have real world connections of some sort with more than 30,000 people. I find this slightly annoying as well. I actually stopped accepting invitations at about 25,000 because I realized actually there are some really important people I will meet over the next few years that I actually want to connect with rather than having them follow me. So I kept some space, and then I think it's also maybe worth going back and deleting a few that you think actually they are not real people, they're not people I need to connect with. But it's a challenge. I wish there wasn't a limit to this.
Yeah, so this is where I find that challenging because, especially the last 2 years, I've had so many online meetings with so many people, presenting to 50 people at a time or anything like that, that I actually feel I have a relationship with and would
Mm.
like to stay in touch with, and they'd like to stay in touch with me. So it's you get to that 30,000 line very quickly, at least in my line of work and my, daily habits of connecting with the community. I do feel like I don't actually have to know someone or have met them in person to accept a first line connection. And so
Mm.
I think this is a limitation that I think ultimately needs to change. And I really, I mean, that's what they suggested as well. I really don't like the idea of going back into people that have accepted and then kind of kicking them out. That seems really kind of brutal for, an application supposed to build a community. But so in any case, so that's where I'm at.
Mm.
If you want to connect with me, I guess you'll have to follow me, because
Oh,
and
well done to getting to to 30,000. That's amazing.
well, yeah. Now I'm just disappointed. I cannot accept more people. So
Yes.
but we've got a few questions here, and you were talking about emphasis earlier. When considering a data mesh and a data-driven ecosystem, it's better to try and get. Is it better to try and get data engineers to implement it, or look for dedicated providers? What are the trade-offs? So I can try and take that on if you want.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I think this is a great question, by the way, Mike. Because I think this is true of any organization where you have to consider, okay, do I have the talent that's available for me to actually accomplish my goal? And do I also think that the work that I'm asking my data engineers to work on is actually a core to my business and differentiating? And so I think those are probably the two questions you have to ask yourself before you decide, do I outsource this work, or do I keep in house? I think there's a lot of literature on that. In fact, the Innovator's Dilemma book was about that, which is how do you determine what is your core and the place where you're going to be able to innovate better than anybody else. And if you outsource too much, then you quickly realize that you've now outsourced what was the core of your business. So as an organization, if you feel like you're becoming more of a data company than you're becoming a financial services company, then that might be something that's worth for you to invest in data engineering talent and keep it as a in-house knowledge rather than outsource it. We see this every day where there's organizations like Wayfair, for instance, that have thousands of data engineers as a proportion of total employees. I think in their case, 18 to 20% of their employees are data engineers, data people. We see financial services organization. I can't remember DBS Bank, I think, is an organization in APAC, which recently explained that they had more people working on data than they actually had tellers.
Mm.
And the reason for that is because they realized their core differentiation is going to come from how well they understand their clients and customers, so they can customize offers and create experiences that are going to be a lot more compelling. And so I think, it's not a straight answer, but I think it goes to that. What is the core of your company? And do you have the talent that you can onboard or train up fast enough so you can put in yourself in a position where you can compete effectively? What do you think, Bernard?
Sorry, you went on mute too early, I think.
I said, what do you think, Bernard? What do you think about that perspective?
No, I think that makes complete sense. I think you want to look at your skills, you want to look at your culture, you want to look at your technology, and I think they all play a role in all of this. And if you if you're still in the process of centralizing things and moving to the cloud, you might want to complete some of this first before you consider a proper data mesh approach. But I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, then we've got quite a few questions here, but I know we've got 2 minutes. So I don't know if you want to take one more question, Bernard, and wrap up, or if we should talk about what's coming up next month for you.
Next month, I have so many super cool things coming up. I have a conversation scheduled in with a TikTok superstar,
Okay.
Chris Collins. She goes as Call Me Chris on TikTok. She has something like 43 million followers, which is completely nuts, and over 5 million followers on YouTube and 2 million on Instagram. And so we will talk about the importance of um, or how to become a video content creator, and whether anyone needs to now be in the video space, which I think is a super interesting conversation. I then have a number of conversations I will talk to Brian Christian, who has written The Alignment Problem. So, this is a book that I would highly recommend to anyone. Talks about how we align AI, so artificial intelligence, with human values and the challenges around this. And this is a problem that we've had we've talked about for a very long time now. Nick Bostrom, the Oxford philosopher that
Mm,
I've had on my channel, talked about the problem before, that if you have a really powerful AI and you tell the AI to create as many paper clips as you can, then it might end up basically destroying the world and turning everything into paper clips because it uses all the raw material. Um, and this is obviously a slightly crazy example, but how do we align AIs with human values, and especially as we are now giving more of our human decisions
mhm.
to AIs, whether this is medical or in the justice system, whether we're now using AIs to determine whether someone should go on parole or not. And all of these or in the financial world, whether you get a mortgage or a loan approved. And it's really important that we question some of the algorithms in the background. So this is something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge trade-off you have to think about. Do you want answers faster and with more agility, but then you compromise this idea of, what's the right thing to do. So I'm sure, lots of conversations around that. For me, in the next few weeks, there is going to be lots of events, of course. So you hear a lot about me online. Um, we also have in your geography the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. I think it's coming out May 9th and 11th. So I am looking forward to traveling for that one. And so hopefully, who knows, maybe we do our session in person. That would be something quite unique. I don't know that we would know how to do that because we've been so used to doing this online, but maybe we should figure it out. Oh, you're on mute still, I
I
think.
am, I am, I am,
Famous,
I'm
famous
ready
word.
for my glass of wine now. Thank you so much, Bruno. As always, has been such a pleasure. Thank you for everyone joining. As always, let us know what you think. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, please put them in, and we will hopefully see you again next month for another monthly wrap up. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.